Our hashtag for this session is Best NTC Panel Ever. It's a lot of letters, yes, but it's easy to remember, right? Okay. Do you want me to just start?
Yes.
Okay, so I'm going to start. Can you get the file that says nonprofit marketing template up here? Okay, so we've developed a format that is, excuse me, just joking, very little of us talking because we really want to hear from you. We feel that we're all experts sitting in this room, and our format is going to be, each of us is going to answer a question, John's first question to us, which involves sharing a strategy and a case study for that strategy in 5 minutes or less. And then we're going to do the same with something at the tactical level. And after that, we're just going to open it up to Q&A and have you guide the balance of the session. And we'll do some responding, and we hope that you do some responding as well.
Excellent. Thank you, Nancy.
Sure. Anytime. It's a hard person to stand in the shoes of. But,
Great. So do we want to go through and do those first? We just do the case studies. And excellent. Let's do that. Should I ask you to start while we do the technology, or?
Sure. Dave is getting my thing up, but I don't need it.
Okay. And you don't have a thing, so can we ask you about your case study? And I'm sorry, are you saying that you need to wait for him?
No.
Okay.
I don't need to wait here. Okay, so let me tell you about my lens on this all, because that context is going to give you a better understanding of why I approach this issue the way I do. So for my working life, I've worked with communications. So I was doing that before the web. I jumped onto the web and online communications very early in '94, bringing the Foundation Center and many grant makers online in the mid-'90s. And then started this consulting practice where it quickly became clear that you couldn't work with the web in isolation, and it had to be a truly integrated part of your communication strategy. So that is my lens to this question. And what's interesting is I think that the very same need that surfaced back in, I'd say, the end of the '90s to look at that time it was the web, and now it's social media, not in isolation, not as tools, but as part of an integrated communication strategy, that the urgency to do so has surfaced again around social media tools. We are seeing sort of a second wave online communications-wise. There's the same kind of pressure, the same kind of urgency of jumping into using that stuff. And a lot of people are doing so without thinking about how that integrates, or if it does, into their overall communications planning. What that results in a lot of the times is what this woman I know who does great tracking for nonprofit evaluations. Her name is Edith Asaby, works with Atlantic Philanthropies. She calls it the tactical syndrome, and it's really a chronic illness. And I just wrote an article on this a couple of weeks ago. What you get with this is all action and no traction. Now, I recently, if you could move ahead to the, anyway, I recently finished working with a client who was really stuck in this kind of path. And I'm going to talk about them by name because they were really open-minded and very interested in moving out of that situation. So they were all into social media, a client organization called the United Jewish Federation of Tidewater. For those of you who don't know the Jewish federations, they're sort of like, they're fundraising organizations, sort of like the United Way, not the the old United Way model where they just, if you could click actually on the first link, the old United Way model where they basically are a pass-through organization. Is that hotline? It should be linked. If you double click.
It was, but then now it's going to start up his browser.
Oh, okay. All right. Anyway, so they had been basically doing the same thing for 40 years since they were founded. And then all of a sudden, they realized that because Jews in the South they used to be discriminated against, there was a real reason for people to give to them in years past. But that kind of identity and that kind of drive was missing because, it was had become a very diverse community. They were talking in the same ways and communicating in most of the same ways they had always communicated. Like putting this out, putting that out, doing that brochure, that program, this horrible website. And if you can click on that button, is this a website that's going to make someone run away or what? And click on this button right there. See, it doesn't even let you click. It should let you click.
Double or single tap for you?
There you go. Okay, this is the homepage of this organization that, believe it or not, raises millions of dollars a year, over $10 million with a staff of 3 people, but their website sucks. And if you go back to that slide, they also somehow have this Facebook page, and then they also have this LinkedIn group, and then they also have a Twitter handle. So they have 3 people working their butts off, and all this action and no traction. So I was called in and did analysis, and the first thing I said, you have to do is, I'm really making John work here, is do some planning. I can't tell you what the right thing for you to focus your efforts on is until we look at what are your organizational goals? A lot of these questions are really organizational planning questions. What are you trying to achieve organizationally? And then how can I help you put communications to work to achieve those? And then what actions do we have to motivate to achieve those goals? And then what are the most effective ways to do that? So they had been really just kind of doing everything because they didn't really know what was the right thing to do. And through a very straightforward but comprehensive planning process with me, we were able to shake out both the low-hanging fruit, those strategies that were going to make the most difference for them with the most reasonable, the most moderate investment, and also highlight for them those particular audience groups that they needed to engage. Now, it indeed turns out, and if you can go to the prior slide and click on that link, it turns out that the folks that they're trying to engage via the Facebook page, which is not a fan page, unfortunately, but a friend page, but are the right group. Because all of their donors, like the donors of many folks here in the room, are 65 and higher. So they were starting in the right direction, but they were neglecting, because they were mostly doing mail other than that, so they were kind of neglecting a lot of people between 35 and, let's say, 65, which is the core group of people you're trying to move up the donor engagement pyramid. So I have for you actually hard copies of this nonprofit planning marketing plan template. And also, John, if you can go to the other page with the link, the other slide. Oh, John. Anyway,
in one place.
you can, if you can just show that. Okay, so if you want to just jot down that link, you can download this. And if you can spend 1 hour a day for 2 weeks, that's 10 hours, you're going to get a baseline marketing plan. Some of you already probably have very effective marketing plans that will really help you see how to use social media most effectively now, next year, and give you an insight in the role it might take in the future. So that is my recommended strategy. On to Dave.
Thanks. So did you want to start asking us questions? Did you still want us to go through the case studies?
Yeah, I'd like to do those examples first, and then we'll move on.
If you want me to do that, you want me to pull it up?
Yeah, sorry.
Do you want me to go from yours? Go ahead. So I'm David Neff, and I am Dave I Am on Twitter, and my blog is 50wonderful.org. And I'm here today representing Ridgewood Ingenious Communications, which is a marketing firm, digital solutions firm, that actually goes out and serves nonprofits and government clients. So we're going to take you through a little bit of kind of what we're doing as far as social media fundraising, and just a couple of these slides, and then we'll get another case study, and then John's going to lead us through a bunch of questions that he's come up with and things like that. So the main things, I'll skip through this a little bit as far as social media fundraising, but the ones that I especially want to talk about today, hold on, I'm getting to the right slides here. How many of you have heard of the Frozen Pea Fund for fighting breast cancer? So a couple people in the back, that's awesome. What this was a campaign that started in 2008 and very much at the end of 2008 and into 2009. And there was a blogger named Susan Reynolds. And Susan Reynolds was very popular on Twitter. Obviously, in 2008, Twitter was kind of just getting started. You know, there weren't a ton of folks on there. And, you know, she was very much a motherly type on Twitter and helping people out and saying hello when they first joined and things like that. Susan also had her own blog. Susan went in and got a biopsy and came home. And, you know, her breast hurt a lot from the biopsy. They were trying to figure out, you know, did she have cancer, you know, all the other things associated with that. And so Susan didn't have ice in her refrigerator, and so she took out a packet of frozen peas, and she, you know, held it like this, and she took, you know, a MySpace, is what I like to call it, photo of herself. And she thought this was funny, and she sent it out to a bunch of her friends and tweeted it out and put it on her Facebook and things like that. And then she changed the name of her blog to be called Boobs on Ice. And she started blogging about her breast cancer experience, right? And just what it was like as a woman, you know, in her age group to have breast cancer and all the things she's going through and health treatment and everything else around that. And the online community picked this up, and they thought it was pretty funny too. And they said, you know what, we should start raising funds for Susan, right? We want to create a frozen pea fund for Susan, right? And she's changed the name of her blog. She's got the photo of the frozen peas, things like that. And the community started to pick it up. And Susan's like, well, I think this is great, but it should go to an organization. Like, I don't want people directly donating to me. And the cool thing for us, at the time I was at the American Cancer Society, is we were on Twitter and we were listening, right? Think about what your strategies are for listening, people talking about you, all the other things. We covered a lot of it in the Housewives session for social media before this one. So if you want actual tools, you know, come up and talk to us or check out that panel as well. And so we were listening. We jumped in and we said, hey, we have Making Strides Against Breast Cancer, the American Cancer Society, one of the oldest research-based science organizations around cancer and especially breast cancer, and here's what we're doing. Susan said, cool. From now on, you know, all this money we're raising is going to go towards this. People picked it up. People were already picking it up because of Susan, not because of the American Cancer Society, but because they cared about this individual in social media and in real life and everywhere else. So the community started to do fun things, right? They started Frozen Pea Fridays, which we'll talk about in a minute. And they started the Frozen Pea Fund. We will not appease cancer. Yeah. A million of those. Like, imagine every joke involving peas and the word peas and please and everything else in the world. But it was great. A movement started out of this. People dared other people to eat a package of frozen peas on YouTube, like out of the frozen package and making faces and who can eat the most frozen peas. and I'll donate $50 if you can eat more than this person, things like that. So it turned into this really cool movement, right? And the main way that this happened was much like we see nowadays with the Iran, and everyone turns their screen green, or Movember. All of your male friends and sometimes female friends have mustaches for Movember on their avatars, right? Or the Lance Armstrong ribbon, or any other ribbons that you guys see. This was like the start of that. And what people did was they changed their avatars in social networks to reflect frozen peas, right? And they did this every Friday, then they changed it back to normal, or they just kept it up there. But the idea was every Friday, when you log on to whatever social network you were on at the time, Facebook, Twitter, MySpace, things like that, you would see your friend and they would have something weird up there, right? You'd be like, what's the deal with that? And you'd be like, oh, you just opened the door, here's my pitch. I'm raising money for breast cancer, and we're doing Frozen Pea Fridays. And all we're asking is for you to donate the price of a bag of frozen peas. So what, that's like $12 at Trader Joe's. That's like, $8 at Central Market or Whole Foods, and $1 at your normal, $2 at your normal grocery store. So we started this whole not only social movement of people changing their avatars, doing something different, but also micro donations, right? We're not asking for $50 on these social networks, we're asking for $5, $10, $15. We responded as the American Cancer Society, set up a donation page, and once again, this whole movement of people changing their avatars and doing this kind of weird, interesting campaign started. This is the Flickr photo group, so these are some of people's avatars, right, that came up. I like the one on the second line, that's probably like the ex-boyfriend at the very end, and she just put like the frozen pea over his face instead of like cropping him out of the thing. But it was great, and we got all this really cool publicity around it, right? So Scoble was talking about Shell Israel. I mean, the American Cancer Society was on TechCrunch. We were like, I don't even know what that is, but we're on it. And we got amazing, amazing coverage out of this, right? The National Home Office, which is here in Atlanta, was calling and being like, what's the frozen peas thing again? I know, you got 2 minutes in the national meeting to talk about it, but now it's really taking off. And we ended up raising a lot of money. In fact, brands started to say, sign up to talk to your favorite blogger, and you'll see at the bottom, all the money this week goes to help support the Frozen Pea Fund to fight breast cancer. Now, this was a bold campaign for us as the American Cancer Society at the time, because often we like to control the brand, right? You can't have the logo unless you talk to a lawyer. You have to fill out a 12-page form to use our name, make sure everything's capitalized, brand standards, the logo's red and blue, not green and purple, things like that, right? And we already have issues with that with Relay for Life. If people think Relay for Life, but they don't necessarily think of the American Cancer Society. But this was a time when we let go, and we ran a really interesting campaign. We let go, and we raised a lot of money. In fact, in 1 month, I have a video, but I'll save that for the instance of time. But in 1 month, we raised around $10,000 for this cause. And this was in 2008 on these small social networks at Christmas time. This was all in December. So, right, think of all the other campaigns that you're getting to donate and talk about and things like that. And so, I think if I want to leave you guys with one fundraising story today, would be run a bold campaign like this. Let go a little bit of your nonprofit's brand and your organization's brand, and find somebody who's an advocate out there and talk to them, right? Susan didn't talk to us first. She started it on her own. So imagine what you guys could do if you actually go out and find that brand innovator, someone who has an amazing, amazing story and wants to run with it, and then just let a little bit of yourself go. I think you can all, raise a lot of funds and a lot of awareness in a short time.
Excellent, thank you. Great, so now we'll have Demetrio talk about his case study, his information.
I just wanted to say one thing. What Dave's story about Susan is an incredible one, because she was represented an exponential expansion of the marketing and fundraising staff for the American Cancer Society. So there are people out there, both colleagues in your organization as well as supporters of all kind, who are waiting to communicate for you. You just have to find them, engage them, and train them.
How's everyone doing? Again, my name is Demetrio Maguigad. I'm the new media manager at the Community Media Workshop based in Chicago. We work with about 2,500 nonprofits a year, actually developing training, actually and developing resources for small nonprofits, even small businesses, and helping them get their story out. So everything from PR to press development to basic general communications work. Part of the resources that we develop actually, and some of the work that I do is, I'm also the project manager and editor of Getting On Air and Online into Print, which is in its 19th annual edition right now, which consists of a 50-page handbook pretty much and how-to for nonprofits regarding communications. And it lists pretty much every journalist in the Midwest market region. So this is a really great handy book. And some of the things that Nancy mentioned, also that David mentioned, is looking at strategy and thinking about process and investing in the time and getting a big picture of what you're actually doing. And if those of you, I might not have enough for everyone, but I actually took excerpts from our handbook, which includes a social media policy worksheet, as well as an online communications worksheet that we've developed at the Community Media Workshop. One of the other things that I do for the workshop is also develop and implement our online communications for the organization, as well as train a lot of organizations specializing on this. And I'm going to try and be really quick because I really want to get to hearing a lot of your questions out there. But some of the things I want you to make sure that you take away from, at least from me, is understand that tools, particularly like social media tools and communication tools out there, is not necessarily going to be able to get you those donations and create specific impact for your organization. It is your strategy. It is how well you tell your organization's story. That is probably one of the most important things. And so we need to start thinking more strategically about communications and act more tactfully. So moving from the very general to the very particular, we're looking at your communication strategy. Some of the things that, one thing I'll talk about really quickly is usually when I lecture, I talk about, I give this broken sink scenario to a lot of nonprofits. And for me, when I grew up, my dad actually made me do like everything. He never called the plumber, he never called the mechanic. I was always under the hood fixing stuff, So one of the things that we had to do first is, when there was a problem with the sink, we had to look at it. We had to analyze what the problem was. And once we understood what the problem was and we were able to assess it, we then identified the very specific tools that we needed to fix that problem. Then we go to the hardware store, we go to Ace Hardware, we get the plumber wrench and some plumber putty or whatever, and we fix it. What I see a lot, especially for small nonprofits who are trying to jump into the web, is they go to the hardware store first. And they pick out all these things that, like your rubber, stoppers for the sink. And then when they get back home, they realize they picked up all these tools that is not going to help them focus on what their message is or what the problem is. And so that's how we really need to start thinking regarding communication strategically. I try not to look at social media as a strategy and communications as a separate strategy, but I try to look at communications in general, starting off with a communications plan in a long-term base, and then identifying specific campaigns that are winnable. Just like, I come from an organizer's background, and I forgot to mention also, those of you who might have been expecting Gordon Mayer in my place, he could not make it here, and he did wish he was here. But we work very closely like that, and that's one thing that we really try to pitch is focusing in on investing in the time, getting an overview of what your communications plan looks like, getting very general goals, and then targeting those very specific goals within your campaigns. One very specific campaign, just to be really quick, is at last year's conference, one of the goals that we wanted to try and do was build buzz around our conference leading up to it. And we were a very small staff. We have about 4 full-time staff at the time, and we didn't have enough of a capacity to continue blogging and building buzz around it. So one of the first things that we did is we looked at the media landscape. We listened in. We found out who was actually already blogging about a lot of the topics and issues that we were also concerned about that we wanted to address at the conference. So on the ground, we actually convened them. We convened the bloggers. We asked them actually on the ground what their concerns are, and we made them partners. And so for about 3 months, we established very specific information on our website that not only they could use to kind of help evangelize our conference, but at that time, I think we had like 5 bloggers blogging about our conference for us at a volunteer base. And it was a really great success. They eventually came to the conference and actually had a very special panel speaking specifically about that. So I'm just going to quit here so we could get to all of your questions.
Okay, so while Dave is bringing up, my story now isn't actually about a website, but I'm just going to show you the website so we can talk about the before and after of this organization, the Environmental Health Coalition. Before we do that, though, I just want to see a show of hands. For the folks in the room, how many of your organizations have a overall marketing or communications plan that integrates social media? Okay, so that's about 20% of the folks in the room. And I tell you, that's pretty good. That's pretty good. And how many of you in here are actually implementing one or more of those social media campaigns? Okay, and wait, leave those hands up. Okay, so what I'd like you to do now is put your hand down if you work in a department other than communications. Put your hand down. Okay, leave your hand up if you do that in community. So it's just a few people. So what that says to me, to us, is that most organizations, and this is something I know you're probably not surprised at this, and that's why you're here, is that most organizations have siloed social media somewhere in the organization, and it's not working as effectively as it could. And the rest of the communications channels aren't either because they're not working together. And when channels aren't working together, what that does is confuse audiences. If there's not consistency, not that you should be parroting the same words to different audiences and different channels, but there have to be some elements that can be easily recognized at a gut level so that somebody, whether they see a poster, get an email, get a postcard, are on Facebook and see an update from your fan page, they can say subconsciously, it doesn't take them any effort, oh, that's from the Environmental Health Coalition. So, just to go back to the plan a little bit, what that helps you do is when you have all your channels integrated, is that's a clear path for going forward. And it also, when you articulate that plan, incorporating all the channels, it indicates very clear baselines to measure your progress against. And it creates, because a plan like that is generally shared with leadership, and assuming it's approved, it means they're buying in. So they're kind of with you. And then if some things aren't working, you can say, we really need more investment in this area. I mean, plans, I find people run away from planning because it's not fun. It's not peas. It's not frozen peas. That creative stuff is so fun. But you have to do planning to make the most of what you have and to have the greatest impact. This organization, the Environmental Health Organization, is one I'm just finishing up. They're a really interesting organization, 30 years old, and out in the San Diego area. And they've had some really muddled communications. And part of why that is they are still run by their founder. So I don't know how many of you work in organizations that have a founder that's been there for 10, 20, 30 years. But, it can be hard for people who found organizations to kind of get outside their own perspective. But also, this organization has to work with some very, very different kinds of audiences. They need to engage policymakers. First of all, what they do, they have a very confusing name. They're not really an environmental organization in terms of conservation or that kind of thing. They're concerned about the health of individuals in certain communities that have been hurt by toxic pollution. So while they're trying to reach policymakers, or those in policymakers' offices, really, who can influence them. They're also trying to, how they do their work is to train citizen advocates. And because of where they are, right in the border region, a lot of these advocates aren't citizens. A lot of them are Spanish speaking. So they need to be engaging at a grassroots level as well as this policy level. And it's really, really hard for any organization to do. So they just worked with me to finish a communication plan, and it highlighted messaging as a key strategy. And messaging is what's actually a tactic. Branding is a strategy. But messaging is something so many organizations overlook. They assume they're doing it right. They know what they mean. They know what they mean themselves, and they assume that everybody else does too. And actually, I did a survey recently of about 900 organizations and found out that 86% of them feel that their messages don't connect with the people they need to engage. So it's pretty bad. These folks have a pretty obtuse name, Environmental Health Coalition. What the heck does that mean? And they haven't been able to stop long enough to put too much time into the way that they present themselves. And this was the time. This was the time because they're trying to expand geographically into a broader region. It's their 30th anniversary, and they're going to use that as a way to talk about the geographic expansion. And while they're getting attention for that, they want to use messaging in traditional channels and social media channels because they are doing a lot of communicating with their citizen advocates through actually a Facebook group that they've put together. Right. No, so the messaging. Great. Messaging is the strategy. So they wanted to use environmental justice. Now, a lot of the citizen advocates they worked with are not citizens, and a lot of them are illegal immigrants, but they were really holding on to environmental justice because that's how they think of their organization. Immigrants think of, whether legal or illegal, Department of Justice, and it's not a positive affiliation. So we worked together to develop some messaging that has totally turned things around for them. They haven't redone their website yet, but they're on their way. But it's enabled them to become clear and consistent in their messaging, to engage a much broader range, the range of audiences they need to do. And their new tagline, I'm just going to leave it at that, is empowering people, transforming communities, and improving health. So there's a point of entry for every one of their target audiences there. They're using it cross-platform, and they're really finding that they're able to connect with their audiences more effectively across all of those channels. So I'm just, I think you and I are very much on the same page. Do some planning, figure out what is the most important key strategies and the tactics to make those real, do those, and also embed them into your social media outreach.
Great, Nancy, thank you. And that's interesting to hear you talk about because I've been doing lately a lot of workshops around social media 101 and 201. And inevitably, whenever I do these trainings, I always ask the audience, and I'll ask you all now, how many of you can tell me the top 5 most popular pages on your website? So this is being a technical crowd a little better. It's about 50%. In most of my experience, it's usually 20% of the people. So I always stop and I give them the harangue about you need to eat your vegetables before you eat dessert. Social media is dessert. And a big point of social media is to drive traffic to your website. So if you don't have a website that you're happy with, why are you spending this time and energy on that? You're not even tracking the success of your website. So you're giving people what you think they want rather than listening to what they actually want. And if you're going to do social media right, you've got to be listening because you've got to see, gee, I'm putting all this effort into Facebook. Is it resulting in traffic to my website or not? Same with Twitter. Same with these other efforts you're going to put in. Otherwise, you're just throwing things at the wall, and you could be wasting your time on things that are ineffective. I mean, I had a client that was spending like 10 hours a month keeping up a community calendar on their website. And we looked at their web statistics. No one ever looked at that. So wouldn't you like extra 10 hours a month? I know I would. So oftentimes when I'm engaged, I have to move them back to just what Nancy was talking about, that messaging, that branding, that you've got to start there. You've got to start with those foundational elements of an effective online presence, which are your website and good email communications. Then you can build on this. Not that you shouldn't put your toe in, but still. Great, so all right, so then I'll go to David and ask about his tactic or strategy he wanted to share.
I would say, my number one thing would have to go, I think if 2008 and 2009 were very much what is Twitter, what is Facebook, the super, super basics, the things that I'm talking about and that we're working with our clients at Ridgewood very much are about listening and building tools around listening. So one that we actually went in and did was an iGoogle dashboard, and I explained it before. We actually got the idea from the Humane Society. And the Humane Society, believe it or not, not everybody loves puppies and kitties, right? It's not that. It's that, not everybody's against or for necessarily the Humane Society's policies. So there's a lot of people out there talking smack about the Humane Society or starting Facebook pages that are against them or saying, this or that or things like that. So they constantly monitor that. And there's tools out there like Radian 6. A lot of the vendors here sell tools, but what we did, being a nonprofit, and even at the size of the American Cancer Society, was say, let's start small, and let's actually just build our own iGoogle dashboard. And so iGoogle dashboard lets you set up your own little columns and your own little streams of information, and all of those are pulled in from RSS feeds. So anything out on the web that generates an RSS feed, you can plug into iGoogle. Most people, it's the weather or the Red Sox updates or whatever it is. For us, we went to Twitter, did a search for our name, and hit the button where it says save as an RSS feed, and then put that in. We did one for all of our competitors, competing organizations, smoking bans, legislation around smoking, Philip Morris, Altria. I mean, we searched all these terms on Twitter. We did the same thing out for forums. Facebook's a closed network, so we couldn't search there, but all the other networks where you could generate an RSS feed. And so once a day, we'd log in and we'd check out this iGoogle dashboard. And somebody would say, hey, I should probably send this to the communications department, or I need to send this to my boss, or hey, the CEO probably needs to see this right now. And things like that. And that allowed us to monitor all these multiple channels. If RSS feeds are too complicated for you, or you're doing this like super DIY, TweetDeck, and set up a column on TweetDeck to monitor that specific thing on Twitter. Now, it's not going to bring in forums and Facebook and all these other things, but it will bring in those searches on Twitter. So, whether it's an iGoogle dashboard to actually go out and monitor all these things, and think big, right? Think your competitors, who you're competing for in your same town. Think of buzzwords. Think of, if you're doing legislative advocacy, things that they'd want to know. Do that, or, start small. Get TweetDeck. I mean, there's other ones out there, but that's the one I use. And get TweetDeck and set up columns for specific searches, and have somebody looking at that. And maybe that's 10 minutes a day. Maybe that's on the list of things you do right in the morning or right before you go home and things like that. But that would be my number one tool, an actual practice that I'm hoping you guys would use. And something that at Ridgewood we're saying, here's something that you can build yourself, and then when you're ready for the next level, come back and talk to us. And we have software and solutions and things like that to help nonprofits monitor who's talking about them, what they're saying, and things like that. But iGoogle and TweetDeck would be my two tools as well.
Excellent, David. Thank you. And just one thing that you mentioned when you mentioned Facebook, and I'd like to see a show of hands here. How many of you have Facebook pages that your organization did not set up kind of officially? Okay, great, quite a number, because I recently was speaking with colleges and universities and high schools, and like 80% of them had pages on Facebook that they had not set up because people set them up for reunions and things like that. Because I'd had the experience with a client who somebody set up a Facebook page for them that wasn't their official one, and what did they want to do? They wanted to slap that person with a lawsuit. It's like, well, okay, so you've got someone who, for free, is trying to help you market your cause, and, the much proper response is to, thank them. Maybe you can make them an admin on your page, give them some talking points. This is the way we like to talk about our organization, but as was mentioned before, you want them not parroting, but talking in an authentic voice, which is their own, because that's really can be unique and powerful. So, great, David, thank you. All right.
It's really quite amazing, actually, all the tools that are available to us right now to communicate directly to our people. About 10 years ago, I was a communications director for a regional office for an international peace organization, the American Friends Service Committee. And if people remember, about 10 years ago, that was actually before the war had broken out. And so I was put in charge to send a message of peace at a time where no one wanted to talk about it. And it was pretty depressing. We didn't have Twitter or a lot of these other things. But one of the first things I actually did, because I was so convinced that we need to get a story out in the daily paper to really tell our story. One of the first things I did was I read every newspaper. I got to know every journalist. And I would try to understand their position. And this is also part of listening, you know. Nowadays, you know, we shouldn't forget about the newspaper. Nowadays, you could pick up a daily paper in any of your cities, and most likely, you'll have the email and Twitter account of that journalist. It's so much easier now, just what David was mentioning, to be able to follow them and monitor them. Not too long ago, about last year, there's a woman named Ava Pinar, who is a communications associate over at the Chicago Community Trust. And she had started out with a communications plan saying, I'm going to target 5 journalists, and I want to get a feature story in the daily paper. You know, so she developed her communications plan, and a part of integrating social media into her communications plan was identifying those journalists and what their Twitter accounts were. So for 3 months, she monitored what they were saying, what they were doing. One night, she mentioned this at a conference a while ago, that it was late at night, and I think it was Tom McNamee had tweeted out on a deadline looking for story ideas. She had sent him previously already a number of press releases and emails informally introducing herself as well. So she had the opportunity to immediately direct message him through Twitter, pitch him the idea right there. You know, 3 days later, they got a feature story in the Chicago Sun-Times. You know, monitoring and listening are very important. Just before we go out into our discussion here, just want to make sure I mention 2 basic things. Some of the things that you need to start thinking about when developing your communications plan is 3 things. Be goal-oriented, you know, understand what you can achieve. And if you achieve those things, what sort of impact will change in the work that you do, or what will change in the communities that you work with. Secondly is your audience. Identify who are your audiences online and on the ground. One really quick example is I was in Detroit doing a training session, and there was an organization that had gotten funding to build a website to help with their capacity. So they actually got registered. Young people were able to register on the website for programs. But for a year, no one was using their website to register. And so I asked them, you know, well, you know, what's the process? And it got to the point where I found out, they had mentioned to me that it was their parents and their guardians that were actually the ones that had to register them. But they serviced young people on the ground. If you went to their website, it looked like MTV, right? So parents going to the website actually were a little confused and couldn't understand or really try to engage with the website. They were able to, once they were able to identify that their core online audience to create an impact, which is parents of the young children, you know, the impact being pushing them to their registration sites to allow more of these young people into the program. You know, they were able to start seeing results, you know, and they began using Facebook and MySpace as a way for the young people to engage with one another. So that was another way to be very, to kind of understand, you know, how that kind of integrates. The third is being, again, messaging. Because there's so many different audiences with so many different ways we could appeal to them, you know, it's okay to kind of talk to people in very different ways. I could talk to you about social media and communications formally here in this session. You know, if you were at the rooftop party with me last night, I could talk to you about it in a very different way after a few drinks, you know? But the same message gets across. So just those 3 basic things, start with those. Your goals, audiences, and your messages. All content when you're communicating, particularly online, is based on 4 basic goals. And that is to persuade people to support your mission, to inform, which is basic information. There's so many nonprofit websites I see out there that don't have basic information about where the programs take place, how to contact them. Make sure that information is available. Educate, you know, that's the 3rd goal. is to make sure that there's content available that helps tell the story about your organization and how you relate to them. And the third being emotional, appeal to people's emotions. Back in the day, communications, in the communications field I used to work in 10 years ago, it was very formal, It wasn't until you really kind of made a contact that you could be a little bit informal. With the social web now, you can be a little bit more informal and appeal, and social media tends to be more emotive, where we could use, video and images to really kind of tell a story. So it's just those two basic things. Looking at first your communication strategy regarding goals, audience, message, and then the 4 basic goals of why you need to communicate. That's persuade, educate, inform, and to appeal to people's emotions.
Excellent, thank you. I mean, because the same thing goes for what I was just saying a minute ago in terms of, like website metrics and email metrics and all those things. When you start a new campaign, trying to think about, okay, well, what do I want out of this? So I'll pick on Danielle. I'll pick on Danielle Maguigad, who's here from National Wildlife Federation. And they did this thing with a hashtag where if I saw, a bald eagle here in Atlanta, I could put it out like a tweet on it, and it would go into their website, and they've got this nice page on their website that's got the whole United States, and you can click on a state and see who saw what day. And when she first did that, she started out with some kind of basic measurements that she wanted to do in terms of, I think it was like 50 tweets during the month, and we want like a certain number of unique people who are doing it, and things like that, and then to go on to hashtags.org and measure it, and things like that. So did you just kind of guess for that, or did you just say, this is what I'm hoping for the first month, and I'm going to check in? How did that work? I don't know, this won't reach. Unfortunately, they didn't give us lavalier, but.
So I guess we started just kind of guessing in large part. We had engagement goals that we wanted to meet, but we knew there were going to be things that definitely we couldn't count on, like when we retweet something, that messes with the hashtag numbers, and you can't, and there's actually, because you can't own a hashtag, anyone can use it for anything, and so now we're kind of trying to better filter out things like that because other people will pick it up. The Nigerian Wrestling Federation occasionally will tweet. And that's what's cool about Twitter, but that is something that makes measuring it harder. But having just very low kind of goals and seeing where it goes was really neat, because this was a campaign that, it's still kind of going on. It's not a campaign, it's a program. And so it's harder to really guess where it's going to go, and it does pick up in the spring and it does ebb, and it's something that happens. But measuring it and keeping it easy and doing that does help us stay on track.
Great, because they had 3 or 4 basic metrics that they wanted to track so they could keep on top of it. Because as you go through this, as you get some data, then you'll be able to create benchmarks and say, oh, okay, well this month we had this many people respond to us or retweet us, things like that. All right, so now what I was going to do is ask the panel a couple questions, and meantime, I'd like you all to be thinking, if you have questions that you'd like me to pose to the panel, or you'd like to pose to the panel, I just wanted to give you the heads up that in a couple minutes I'll turn to the audience and let you all come up. Unfortunately, like I said, I was hoping we'd have a lavalier so I could walk around and actually Phil Donahue, or I guess if it's Oprah these days, yeah, showing my age. Great. But be thinking about that, and maybe I'll have people come up or something so we can actually use the microphone and people can hear. All right, because these are some of the things that I've run into in my practice, and so I was interested to hear their opinions. And so the first one was, if my organization has not already articulated a communication strategy, what can I base my social media strategy on, right? Great, so I'm going to turn to the panelists with that. You'll have the other microphone, right? Oh, great. Any ideas on that, panelists? So, if you're starting with avoid, where do you go from there?
I'm sorry, can you repeat the question, John?
Sure. So if I don't even have a communication strategy, because we're talking about, whenever anyone asks me about, I need a social media strategy, it's like you were talking about, great, well, what's your overall communication strategy? What are your goals? Who are your audiences? What are your messages? So if they don't have that, but they want to get started in social media, and they don't really have anything to base it on, it's like normally you would turn to your communication strategy, but that's not there.
Mm-hmm. Well, for me, just something really easy that I've told I work with a lot of small nonprofit organizations, and this is the case a lot of times, And usually they're the program folks or they're the communications staff that's just test this and the press releases out. But I'm really surprised to see sometimes that those organizations that don't have that do have communication staff do not communicate with program people. And I tell them, you know, your program people are the biggest source for stories about people, you know, and those are so easy to pitch. And then again, what I mentioned earlier, start from the story. What is your story? What is the message? And make it simple. Because once you begin telling the story and engage internally, you know, it's actually kind of internal communications, you know, practices. It's going to feel a little bit natural to begin sharing, you know, creating a fan page on Facebook, which is pretty easy to manage, you know, and begin posting things out that way. You know, and then when you begin to identify, oh, okay, well, these are the stories, this is what we want to try and do, this is when you identify the impact, that's when you can start pulling people to very specific areas on the web or places on the ground.
Yeah, go ahead.
I just wanted to pick up on a really important point that you made, John, which was you have to know the people you're trying to engage, the people you want to become part of your community, the people who can help your organization achieve their goals. And I'd say this is really the essence of, after you figure out who they are, you got to know them. And it doesn't have to be through expensive strategies like focus group. You can do, there's a lot of, your program staff, in addition, they're out there in the field. And a lot of your colleagues, probably communications people, are inside more than anyone else. But you have people out there who are, you know, kind of spiders. And it's great to develop relationships with them to bring back those insights to you. So, you know, if I want to think about messaging that's going to connect, much less social medias, I have to know what's important. Doesn't matter what my organization wants to do or what's important to us. What matters is what do people want those that we need to engage to meet our goals? What's important to them? And then where's the intersection between our organization's wants and their wants? And then, of course, if we're talking social media, even if we can't take that 5 hours to complete a 2-page nonprofit marketing plan. And I really suggest if you don't have a plan, you do this, even if it's a stealth effort. I'm a big believer in stealth, so even if it helps you, it kind of guides your decision on a daily basis and helps you know you're doing more, even if no one else knows about it, do it. But then make sure also you know where your audiences are in terms of social media. What if you spend a lot of effort putting your toe in the water with a Facebook fan page and your audiences aren't there? You know, what if they're not there? That if they're folks that are much younger and so they're really still on MySpace. You know, you really got to know who you're trying to engage and where they are.
You know, I would just say to that, and you know, maybe the opposite view of what they just said even is, as an agency, and if a client came to us and they were like, social media, you know, like, I heard about it on the TV and I need to do it right now, right? I think sometimes you have to say no to nonprofits, right? And just say, well, you don't have a traditional calendar, you know, you're not collecting emails, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? So you just have to say no and say, hey, you know, we'd love to help you start, like, you know, 2 steps behind that, right? Like, let's get you a focused calendar, let's do 2 campaigns over 12 months. Here's the calendar, let us help you write that, let us help you implement that. And then, you know, a year from now, let's sit down and let's talk social media, or let's start with that, and then we'll start off social media with those other campaigns. But sometimes you just have to say no, I think, to nonprofits because, and I know this, right? Sometimes we're just quick to say, yeah, let's go do it. You know, a squirrel is like from Up, right? The movie, like the dog sees and he stops talking and goes and chases a squirrel. Shiny object syndrome, whatever you want to call it. And sometimes you just have to say no, and let's review it and let's get something in place. We can't just dive into social media.
But I have a question for you on that, which is, as much as I'm all about planning and, that's how you're going to get the most out of your efforts, sometimes I think it is important to keep up, for at least people who have communications as at least, part of their hat, to kind of keep up with the tools personally so that when the time comes, they know what's to use and there's a comfort level there. But it's really so hard to do. Let's say you're in a situation where you gotta say no right now to integrating those into your communication strategy. Did you guys have any thoughts about, how do you balance that?
Well, I think in general, I think the tools need to be very practical. Just a really quick story. My father, who is like 74 years old, for maybe 3 years, he bought himself a computer, and he said, "I want to communicate with you. I want the internet. I want the email." Everything had "the" in front of it. I want the Facebook. And so I took time, trying to show him, this is how you send me an email. This is me on Facebook. Let's create you an account. And for like a year, I would never get email messages from him or anything, And then last year, during when the market really tanked, I got a call from him, and he said, "Son, I was just online chatting with my broker, and he said that I pulled up my account, and I'm looking at this, and he was all concerned, about his stock portfolio, and I'm sitting on the other end going, wait a second, you're online, you're chatting with someone? This is a true story, He couldn't, he didn't want to take the time to email because he was really frustrated with it, But when it came to something he wanted to learn, and he knew it was important, he took the time to learn it. And that, again, goes back to my broken sink analogy. I think the more we understand what the problem is and understand what our goals are, for those leaping into the web for the first time, we need to make it very practical, very simple, and use terminology, I guess, that most people are used to. Again, because that's the audience that we're working with.
Great, Dave. Did you have-
No, I think that's great.
Great. All right, so since they get to say their piece, I just had 2 questions that I was going to pose and answer myself, and also ask if you had any input. And one, which was, in what ways should or might your social media strategy be different from your overall communication strategy? And one of the things that came up, because we were talking about this on our calls before the session, was that, it's more dynamic in terms of that cycle of, test and then evaluate and adjust. Because oftentimes when you're doing an email campaign, you have, 2 or 3 emails that go out. It may be a while before, all the results come back in and you can look at them. But this often has a much shorter cycle where, okay, we're going to put this stuff up on, Facebook and Twitter, and then we can look at the metrics and pull it in and see what's working and what's not. And so we can adjust on a more rapid basis. And, kind of somewhat related to that is that, it's what we were talking about in terms of a critical part of the social media strategy is to meet the audience, where they are. And like Nancy said, you don't have to always do these fancy, focus groups. It can be just, asking one question. I mean, I don't recommend sending out, 30-page, survey. There's a lot of survey fatigue out there and a lot of bad surveys. So, but next time you have an event or, you've got your volunteers together for a training or something like that, it can be really easy just to ask and to try and find out. And as, like I said, looking at the metrics as well. Great. Do people have struggles with this aligning social media strategy with their communication strategy? And you'd like to pick our brains or pose a question to the group, in fact, and get the wisdom of the group. So yes, like I said, I'm link challenged here thanks to our lack of lavalier. So I could either interpret or... Sure. So just to repeat the question, she's in IT, but she's responsible for social media strategy, and there's a separate kind of communications people in the department. How does she bring the what she knows and what she knows needs to happen in social media to them, who are used to a much slower evaluate and adjust cycle, to get them to do this, and understand this much quicker cycle with social media?
So I think that case studies with concrete results are the best way to do that. So showing that, and I think that I found organizations, as long as they're not in direct competition with you for volunteers or dollars or whatever, are actually quite willing to share that information. So show it, don't try to tell it. That's what I would say.
I guess, depending on your organization, but, making it a priority, and proposing that at like a staff meeting or to any sort of supervisors or managers that this is the discussion that needs to happen. And a lot of organizations do it a lot of different ways. One of the things that we did actually in our offices and other organizations is, David Wilcox and Beth Cantor developed this wonderful game, the social media game, which was a wonderful tool to really kind of make it fun to begin to understand social media, and I think you could go to
Social media game, it's at Wikispaces.
Yeah, Wikispaces, social media game. Yeah.
wearemedia.org.
Yeah.
Yeah, we had a consultant come and make everybody a booster for social media, but then they're like, okay, get it done. So, there's more to it than that.
Yeah, I mean,
You can also urge everybody to get a personal account on Facebook to just, and sort of become a fan of a cause that's important to them. I think that can really be helpful too.
and I think something that brings up a lot here is the amazing NTEN community, right? And all the people that are involved in it, and members or on the board or volunteer and do things. So to me, when you ask a question like that, I think John Merritt at the YMCA, and he's the Chief Technology Officer for the San Diego, at John Merritt on Twitter. And he did a great session today talking about reverse mentoring, right? The idea of IT mentoring the C-suite. And instead of the C-suite mentoring the IT and things like that too. Another great thing they brought up in their panel today, and I'll steal from it, it's fine, is that, somebody in their IT department was talking about empowering users, and you could do this as well, is when you see somebody do something good in social media, give them the gold star, right? Right, chocolate, whatever it is. In the IT case, they had, you were a junior IT person, like you were part of the Howdy Doody Club or whatever it was, right? Like you would get a little gold star and you'd be the IT star of the day from the IT staff. They'd be like, you solved your own problem. That's awesome. And people would go around the office and brag that I'm junior IT today. And so it's funny little things like that. And so you could develop some sort of game like that to reward people for doing cool things in social media. So, right, Geek for Good, right? You could give them a little sticker like that, so.
Right. And something I would add to that is whenever I'm talking to people about technology solutions, I'm always trying to think about what is important to the person that I'm speaking to. So what is important to your communication staff? Isn't broadening our reach in our message important? And so, I brought whatever. If you can go and look at your Google Analytics, and like Nancy said, she's a fan of stealth. So, if you go out and, try something and it brings numbers, I had 400 extra people come to our website. Isn't there a value in that? Or do we not want these extra people? If not, I'm happy to stop. Because they might donate, and we don't want that either. Or become involved in the organization. And for those who didn't hear, or for also the people who are online, that social media game that David Wilcox and then Beth Cantor remixed is really good because it says, okay, you've got 10 resources, you've got 10 worth of resources, 10 points worth of resources, and Twitter is 5, and Facebook is 4, and this is 3, and this is 2, and you've got to sit down and figure out, I only have so much, time and effort I can put into this. Where am I going to put in my time and effort? And so again, that comes back to the cycle of, I need to look and see what's working. I can, maybe this month I'm going to put a lot of effort into Twitter, and then I'm going to see, did that result in visits to my website and to the pages that I highlighted and things like that. So great. Yeah, I'm sure you're not the only one that struggles with that. So very good. Thank you. Someone else who has a question, and I'm happy to go and get the question and come back to the microphone if you don't want to come up, but yes.
This question, I guess, is a little bit more of a gut check. Nancy, you talked about something before that I think is really important, that a lot of times organizations work on issues, like let's say it's a legislative campaign, for example, and you need to engage people beyond your immediate base. And so you talked about developing messages that resonate not to the people who are already a part of your organization because you know what resonates with them, but those people who you need to get to. And so I know that, focus groups, polling, there's paid phones you can do to identify those messages, but what are some key ways. I think you talked about listening, if you don't have a lot of resources, is one way to find out how other people are talking about issues of importance to your organization. Do you guys have any other tips or thoughts on that? Does that even make sense? Okay.
Because, I mean, as she's doing that, I just will jump in and say, you know, it's kind of like we was talking about before about, you know, if you're going to be writing a blog or going to be putting up content about a certain issue, you need to have gone out like to Technorati and looked up what are the top blogs on this that have high authority figures and read those, you know, because then you get that goodwill. You know, maybe you're commenting on the blog and then they're going to pay attention to you and start writing about your thing. So, you know, who is already talking about this and how can I plug in just in that old kind of traditional press way, developing relationships with reporters or things.
But I actually have a question about your question first, which is about, are you asking how do you learn more about the folks that aren't part of your community, or about how to spread the word more broadly?
I would say the former.
Okay.
So for people on
Yes, so the question is really how to engage those that are outside of your current network that share similar perspective on an issue your organization is trying to advance, but perhaps for different reasons than your organization does. And so in that case, perhaps the message platform that you've developed for your core network wouldn't be relevant, for example, for those groups. Now, let me just preface what I'm going to say by saying that it can make sense to shape talking points for different audience groups so that you make sure that, you know, that relevancy is the key to engagement. But how to reach them? Yeah, because most audience research, even if we do it anecdotally by getting, you know, folks to report back from stories they hear in the field, online surveys, that's already from the people who we know, and it's really not so valuable, and it's so hard to get outside of that. You know, that's a really big challenge. Now, one really interesting way that a client of mine, the Gold Foundation, is doing that is actually working via Care2. And they worked via Care2. The Gold Foundation is a small has been sort of regional organization in the Northeast focused on humanizing physicians. Basically, so quality of care ultimately improves. And, you know, they have a founder who's been there 50 years, who's, you know, not going to be around that long, and their donors are those persons' friends. And they obviously need to reach way outside of their current network. So they work with Care2, who they have a network of people who have indicated their interest in certain issues, and for a very modest fee, you can work with them to put up, for example, a survey of questions that relate to your issue focus. And when folks complete that survey, you get their emails. So that gives you, and there's certain, of course, permission issues with that, but it gives you access to a range of folks who are likely not to be in your current network, but there is some overlap on your issues. So that's one good way to do it. But other suggestions from the crowd, have any of you managed to find ways to do that? Because it's hard. How about you guys?
I think, so if I could understand the question correctly, it's reaching out to and collecting data from audiences or people outside of your usual base? This is just, if I was asked to do this, and I was actually asked to do this very recently, it was something very similar, and it was work on the census, actually. And one of the things that I had done was, okay, I was asked to kind of investigate and get feedback from the Polish community, the Korean community, the Chinese community, all languages which I don't speak or, you know, understand, you know? So, but this goes back again to communications planning and understanding what resources are available. And when I say resources, media channels. This could be, you know, a very specific niche blog or social network regarding the Polish community in your city, or it could be the one channel that a majority of the people within that community look to for information, which is their community newspaper. So that's one of the things I did first, was we did outreach to pretty much every community newspaper out there. We provided information and surveys on our website which we controlled. And we either were able to work with editors to write about what we were doing, or we placed ads in them, and we actually got a really great response to the point where just 2 weeks ago we held an informational session, and we were really worried that it wasn't going to be as diverse as we wanted it to be. But we were very surprised on how many people from the Polish, the Korean, Chinese, Filipino, and Latino community came out. Because that was one of the things that we were worried about, is that it was only going to be the Latino community that was going to come out. And that was the problem. And so we had to figure out ways to figure out how to communicate with them. So we used the web to host information. We use social networks like Facebook to engage with people who might pull people to this conversation. But we use traditional media, actually, which was the main channel for these communities to reach out to.
The only thing I would add to that is if you guys haven't actually gone on to Facebook and looked at Facebook ads and how incredibly cheap they are and how incredibly targeted they are to reach 400 million people that are on Facebook, that are logging in 60% of the time every day, and everything else that goes on Facebook. So go in, look with it. You don't even have to place an ad, totally cheat the system. Go and fill out all the criteria. It'll give you the estimated number and costs and everything else. Design the ad, and then, if it's good, hit submit. If you're like, I'll try this next month, hit cancel. But you'll get all that data, and it's amazing. Just write it down, right? Or copy and paste into a spreadsheet. But Facebook ads have shown tremendous value in campaigns that I have done, and we've done as Ridgewood and stuff for the nonprofit that I help run as well. So I would check that out as well.
I just want to add one thing to that, and the reason why we thought ethnic media right away is, in general, we understand that the print news media is falling, but actually, ethnic print newspaper is actually expanding and has been expanding for the past few years, and that was a huge resource for that campaign. So make sure that when you're doing your communications planning, that's what you're looking for. You're looking for what's available to me. Whether it's social media, whether it's just internet tools, or if it's traditional media, make your message transit between all those channels.
Yeah, I mean, it necessarily wouldn't work for everybody, but for instance, it's my understanding that in Latino communities, radio is still pretty popular. Or if you're dealing with youth, they may not have computers and access to the internet, but a lot of them have smartphones. And so, does that mean we should really look at more focusing more on mobile and doing campaigns? I mean, like you said, oftentimes it's issue specific, and you just want votes this year for this thing. It's not a long-term thing, but I know that's been helpful as well. So, good, thanks. Other people, everyone has their own, great, if I can have you come up. It does reach a little bit further, thanks.
Hi, I work at an organization that's very keen on social media, or at least jumping into it. The executive director keeps telling me, we gotta do this. I keep seeing Facebook. Talk about shiny object syndrome combined with a real bad bout of founder syndrome. It's a lot of fun to be doing communications there.
That's a lot of syndrome. I think a medication is in order.
I've asked, and they won't do it. But in any case, so they're really keen on it, but they see pretty much the one single goal being fundraising in social media, not understanding that there's this broader context of building and being part of a community. In fact, they're now in the process of hiring for the development team, so you were talking about siloing. For the development team, somebody would do online giving, and that person would dabble in social media. So not really understanding the broader communications context. So I guess my question for you is, how do I get these people on board to understand the larger context? I should also mention that the management not really using social media and not really understanding that broader purpose, those other goals of educating and informing and all of that, how to get them on board and make sure that when they do go ahead and hire somebody, that is part of the communications strategy.
Well, you can tell them some anecdotes about people who just jump in and ask for something. It not only doesn't work to raise funds, but it makes people really pissed off, and they're not going to be giving fun. They're not going to get to know you. So getting to know you is first. You know, I was just in this session earlier today with a couple of folks who were talking about Homer Simpson, behavioral economics, but they were talking about social norms being the ruling paradigm, really, especially for online communication. So would you just go up to someone you're interested in meeting and ask them for money? Like, let's hope not, unless you're in really hard times. So, I talk to, everybody you know. Go on the Progressive Exchange listserv and ask for examples of there are organizations that have done it and then have retracted and come back more effectively. Try to find some of those and tell those stories, because you're going to be digging a hole for yourselves. It's going to be impossible to get out of.
And are you in the communications department? Department of One. Right. So you are yeah, exactly. So in my experience with that, right, is lobbying to say, hey, this is the case, and let me be in on the interviews, right? Or feel free to email me, and I'll send you job descriptions that we did social media fundraising people versus social media communications people. And those are at my blog as well, 50wonderful.org. And so, try and lobby to get a little bit of being in that game of like, I know it's fundraising, but I'd like to be involved in the hiring process and the interview process, and, solicit that feedback, and also say, and here's some copy I wrote that should go into the job description. And maybe, I think that's a good way to put yourself in that space, and then maybe later on down the line, that's a co-shared person or things like that between those departments. So, worm your way into that hiring process.
Hello? Sorry. Those are really great examples, actually. I don't think I could really kind of top or kind of add anything to that. But just again, going back, looking at the whole culture around social media, just like what Nancy was saying, it's like when you're at a party, the first thing you want to do is, well, before you even go to a party, you're in your room trying to look in front of a mirror, making sure that you're ready to kind of like present yourself, right? And that's what we do. So but depending on your goals, right? But then when you get there, like Nancy was saying, it's like you don't see a group of people conversing and they just jump in and say, hey, I need some money for something like that. You need to listen in. You need to find out how you could connect with people. And then based on like the four basic, particularly to online communications, I was saying, you prioritize appealing to people at an emotional level, then educate them why, and then you provide the information on how they could help you out with fundraising.
And just something I would say as a follow-up, which is, in my experience, especially people like you described, there's a lot of fear about technology, and there's a lot of misunderstanding and total ignorance about things like social media. And so, in my experience, knowledge eases that fear. And so I don't know if you're able to do education in some way to say, I'm going to do this brown bag lunch, in 2 weeks on Friday. And it's just about generalist stuff about social media. And I'd really invite everyone in the organization to come who wants to. And I'm going to produce a one-pager that gives the top points, which is to say, the old media, the old style is this one-to-many, broadcast our message, we are great, come and donate to us. But that totally backfires on social media. You want to engage the next generation of donors, not disengage them, which is just what you would do using those old techniques in this different style. And to explain to them that this is not about saying we have all the answers about autism or wildlife. It's this is what we think. What do you think? And engaging people in that way, because most of them don't even get that. And that's a big shift for them, and it's like, oh, that's why I have to think differently about that. So if there's a way for you to sneak in some education to get them there, but again, like I said, to me, it's thinking about, well, what's important to them. Great, fundraising is important to them. Great, I understand we need to get there, but this is not how we're going to get there. So, great, yes.
I'm interested in what your experience has been sort of taking communications messages that you've honed and pushing them out into the social media world. You know, folks, my sense of the community on Facebook is different than the community that responds to our emails or reads newspapers. You know, I've dabbled in Facebook, haven't done a lot, watched what other people have done, posted stuff up, stuff I think is really interesting. The thing that I've personally posted that has gotten the most response is a stupid picture of me in front of my house during a blizzard in 1964 with my family, and all these people jump on, oh, that's really great. And I was just intrigued that that's what solicited the most response, and so I'm wondering what your experience has been out there in the sphere.
Well, you certainly can ask folks participating in social media to follow any kind of script. That goes totally in the face of what social media is. What you can do is be very clear with what your community, which includes them, is trying to achieve, and tell them what are some of the points that you used to talk about it, and just, you know, let them run with it and pick up on whatever they think's, you know, going to engage their friends, their family, and talk about it in a way that feels that's the way they talk. You got to let go of control. That's something leadership can be very worried about. I work with a lot of grant makers, and they are so scared of this. Not that they have control, not that any organization has control, but they love that illusion of control.
I think that's perfect. Also, did you get to attend the keynote from Andrew Sullivan? Anybody in here went to so, you know, he is insane for the amount of content that he posts, right? And his ideas of having kind of, you know, he represents Atlantic, and sometimes good and sometimes bad, right? And so I think we see that in your case of the thing that's most interesting is you know, revealing a little bit of yourself online, right? There's me in front of a blizzard. Why'd we take that photo? It was really cold. You know, the camera froze. I mean, whatever you posted around that, right? I think people are interested in that. The study's out there, and I'll crowdsource with my laziness of you guys find it and let me know what it is. But it's about, you know, avatars, like a person's face on a Twitter account versus like a logo, and how much more people respond to a person. I think Home Depot does an excellent job of it. You know, not in the nonprofit sector at all, obviously, but here in Atlanta. And I think, you know, I was in a Home Depot, said something about great customer service, and they replied to me, and which, you know, is becoming more and more common, but it was signed, you know, John, Susan, Bill. And then you go to the Home Depot account, and it's like run by John, Susan, and Bill. And John's in marketing, Susan's customer service, and Bill's in the lumber yard, or whatever it is, right? And I think that's so amazing. Like, that's really cool that Home Depot's exposing themselves. And I think nonprofits should be less scared. Yes, you know, you may have a chief blogger who's the face of your organization, and they may leave. You know what? Your executive director leaves. You have turnover in your IT. You have turnover in development. That's just the way it is. And then you rehire someone who's even better than them to be the voice of your organization or the face of it. The executive director doesn't want to do it, or someone in communications doesn't want to do it. But I think, you know, more nonprofits should let a little more of the personal side of them. I mean, obviously, what conference are we at? What is one of the most personable, you know, groups any of us are ever a member of is NTEN. Right? I mean, they're freaking doing Muppets videos and singing in front of 1,400 people. How much exposing of yourself more can you get than that? Right? And so look at that model. I mean, they're everywhere, and it's great. And we love them for that, right? I'm wearing my Team Holly button.
Okay, you know, those are really great examples. You know, I think people, whatever social network it is, people want to be connected or be a part of something, you know, just like a family. You talk to your brother very differently than you would talk to your boss or a client, you know. And, you know, for me, it's very interesting because, as an example, I host a weekly on-air world music program in Chicago. And, you know, and I also do social media stuff, and I also do communication stuff. And so a lot of times on Facebook, you know, those are the three different audiences that people, that I know in my circles. But one thing I noticed, though, is that I have a website, particularly for a radio program, and it's very informative. It's just, here's when we're on air, this is who we are, yada, yada, yada. You know, very basic information anyone could find on the web, and just kind of where they could tune in and listen. But when it comes to Facebook, you know, or even Twitter, you know, it's different because, you know, it's immediate, and you're engaging with people that are part of that circle, and the people who know you already. most likely. So I could tell them I'm on air at this time, whatever, on my website. When it comes to Facebook, I'm communicating to them the same message, which is tune in, listen to me on air. But I'm telling them this is a great song that was played, by an artist that just died last week, and I was able to meet them and really kind of engage in a very personal level. But these were really great examples.
Great, and we only have a second.
Well, Danielle, actually, there was, had a very good back channel comment, a strategy. Danielle, do you want to just share that for a second about how to find out more about the folks who aren't already in your network, if you don't mind?
Sure.
It was a great idea.
Oh, okay. So one of the things that I try and do is, I definitely do a lot of maintaining the profiles and kind of doing stuff, but you do a lot of outreach too. And one of the things that I'll periodically do is type into Twitter, kids outside. And that deals with a program where we're trying to connect kids outside. And so I do get a lot of comments, or I see a lot of people saying, oh, those kids outside are so loud. But every once in a while I just took the kids outside, they had a lot of fun. And that allows me to actually respond to them and make a relevant comment. You see a lot of these companies, like if you're complaining about your flight, or even Omni was following people when you mentioned Omni Hotels, and that's a good way to be relevant. So, that was what my comment was in the Twitter back channel. And then the only other thought that I had on that topic was, it's really easy to start within your refers for your site and see who's already referring to you. And if it's a blog or if it's a website, see who else they're talking to, because it's very likely you'll overlap. So if they're linking to other blogs, maybe you go and comment on their blog. Or, it's just it's doing basic grassroots organizing outreach, but online. So just think about your friends and your friends of friends, and that's how I do it.
Excellent, thank you. Great, so I know we're at 5 o'clock, so if you would please, if you haven't already, to do the evaluation, I want to thank you for spending the last session of the day with me and of the conference, and please help me thank our panelists. And there's also the plan template and the policy template up here. You're welcome to come get copies. Thank you.